Okay, this is part three of the, I guess, exploration into someone who's pitching themselves as a future leader, has got the country's best interest at heart, your sovereignty, which is a big word that he uses, all that stuff, how he's saying it, but then in action, you might see it's different, which I'm going to go and unpack for you right now. So let's just pick up something says it's really important. I've gone over it in the previous videos, but I'm going to go over and give a bit more detail that I didn't give in the other two. So let's just listen to that first.
Says, and we have, as you can imagine, a lot of people with their own perspectives on what Australia should look like in terms of a new constitution with the common law people. We've got a whole bunch of other things, Magna Carta and the rest.
All right. So when he said Magna Carta, he looked up to the sky or to the roof, the ceiling. That's really critical that he said that, though. It's really important because they have to tell you everything, right? These people who are, I'm going to say, not as clean cut as you might hope. They need to have it all on the acknowledge it all, because that's part of the whole way it's done. I'm going to explain that later, what I'm talking about. And then it's up to you to decide what you're going to do. But as long as they put it in your consciousness, but then they can dissuade you from it, that's all they have to do, right? That's the way the satanic system runs. Now, this guy's really big on talking about Satanists, right? And now I'm going to show you how he uses the exact same methods as Satanists do. But anyway, first, I need to go and show you how he speaks about sovereignty, and he bangs on about it, right? And he makes it your responsibility. So I'll be right back. So you'll see in the same breath he talks about sovereignty, but he speaks about Magna Carta, but he never tells you the true meaning of what is critically important to understand about Magna Carta 1215. So I'll be back with the sovereignty comment. So here we go. We're going to hear the comment he makes about sovereignty. So really pay close attention to how much of a big issue he makes about it, right? Let's see we go.
It gets to the point where they must understand at a deep level that this idea of sovereignty, again, and it's a big deal because people cannot define it. They don't understand it. They don't know what it means. They just want somebody else to take care of them. Well, that's not going to happen.
Okay, so pay attention to what he said. He said people don't understand it. They don't know what it means. They don't know how to define it. They want someone else to take care of it, right? So he's saying that's not going to happen. So on one breath, he's saying, there you go. It's up to you. You know, if you're sovereign, you take care of it, you take responsibility, right? But what is he doing to help your sovereignty along? Because if he's acting in the service of people, not to dominate them, would he not give full disclosure of all the information that's out there? And then you make up your own mind? Would that not be someone who's in the assistance of sovereignty? That's how I define it. Maybe you define it different. So that's what he says. Now we're going to go back to the first video and see what options he leaves you. If you're sovereign, have a listen to what options he's left you as far as the narrowing the corridor of what choices you have as a sovereign, right? It's really, really fascinating. It's really revealing more so than fascinating. So I'll be right back. Okay, now remember what you just heard. It's all about you being sovereign, right? So now let's hear what options he leaves you, if you're going to believe him, as to what you have and how that actually reflects you as a sovereign having control over your own life. Now pay attention, real close attention, what he's giving you as a choice.
Anyway, he appoints an executive council without being elected.
So what he's talking about is the Governor General, just in case you're wondering when he says he, and what would happen if a government was meant to be found as being illegitimate, right? So he's going through the process as defined by a fake constitution. It doesn't have any actual validity. That's actually an act of treason, but you won't hear him tell you that, right? So that 1901 Commonwealth of Australia Constitution is not a constitution, because a constitution, like I've explained before, needs to be written by the people. It can't be written by Parliament. Parliament cannot grant itself authority over the people, and that's what that does. Because if we ever had a correct constitution, we'd be controlling government through independence of the juries. That's never existed since foundation. So whatever he's talking about is not a constitution, because it's what happens in deed, in action, that changes reality, not what's written on paper. And that, even in what's written on paper, is actually proof of the crime, because Parliament wrote it. But he doesn't explain that to you, right? So now we're going to listen to, in more detail, what he's giving you as a sovereign who's in control of their own government, like he says you should be, right, as what your choices are, right? And there's nothing else available, but there actually is, which I'll explain later. But why isn't he telling you that? So here's what he's telling you.
For 3 months in order to do what's got to be done. So we have an out if something goes wrong. Trouble is, if our Governor General fails to act, What remedy do the Estonian people have? And the answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing.
That's what he's given you, right? You're sovereign. You have the right to self-governance, but now he's telling you, you got nothing unless it's up to some individual with a title. Like, what kind of democracy? When I say democracy, I don't mean the fake one of majority rules, not that, not the pretend one, the correct one, the rule of law, democratic rule of law. What kind of system would ever function like that if it wasn't a dictatorship, where you're leaving it up to a public servant to decide on the legitimacy of government? That doesn't make any sense. That's like the foxes watching the hen house. One fox watching another as he's raping the chickens and raiding their hen house. That's basically what he's told you. And that's what he's saying is a legitimate system. Like, really think about that, guys, right? And if he was really there for your sovereignty, is that as far as it would go? Or would he really be out there trying to uncover every bit of information that can show you that right now you have power to act, because there is an actual fully fledged constitution still in play that's over 800 years old, that actually limits what government's allowed to do and gives the people, not so much gives, but acknowledges the people as being the final arbiters of what government is and isn't allowed to do, and the consequences for anyone who's in that system of service for actually breaching that trust that the people have given to them. Right? He doesn't explain any of that. I've never heard him say it once. So now we're going to show you what information he's missing and why would he do that. The only thing I can think of is if he wants to rally himself or position himself into a position where he's going to be your new master, or someone of his ilk, or whoever he's working for. Do you know what I mean? Setting up that whole slave mentality, that 50+1, all that majority rules bullshit, right? That stuff. If he's not setting that up, why wouldn't he be telling you what I'm about to show you? So I'm going to come back in a second. Okay, so here's some of the fundamentals of a system of governance that operates from the democratic rule of law, which is what the English Commonwealth system is, and why Australia doesn't have its own separate law. Because you have a look at anything to do with matters of law where there's public servants that are upholding it, they always swear to who? They don't swear to the Governor General, not to politicians or Parliament. I've done all this before. Just going back over it really quickly. Well and truly serve our sovereign lady, the Queen. I know it's a bit outdated. It would say the King for the newest one, but this is the quickest ones I could find. So that's the only difference. But what does it really mean? It's just an office that's created and someone presides over that office, right? That's all it is. Whether it's male or female, it doesn't matter. It's the office. That's the permanent thing. Because people don't live forever, but the office, until we change our system, that's enduring. Okay, so then guess what it says in the Defence Force? Let's have a look. And look, it even says royal, like I showed you this in the last one, but I didn't point out that it says royal. Here, royal. Well, is there any royalty here in Australia? No. So what does that mean? It means the source of authority runs from somewhere further, right? From someone who's the head of the entire kingdom as far as a system of service goes, not of the people, but to administer a system of service to the entire kingdom, right? And so what do they swear to? Let's have a look. To well and truly serve Her Majesty the Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law. So same source of authority, right? It all runs up there. So what does that mean? It means they're running a system of service that goes right up to the English Commonwealth law. Not Australian law is separate. So this Australian Constitution has its own separate laws. Garbage, right? Otherwise we'd be swearing to whatever people are that are important in those titles, and we never are. None of the politicians do. They all swear to the highest source of authority in this Commonwealth system. Now, he's even going to say it. So I'm going to go back and show you when he says that Australia's a constitutional monarchy, right? So you're going to see a lot of contradictions in what he's giving you, right? So there's all these messages that don't add up, and he's not educating you correctly. Why would someone who's there for your sovereignty and wants you to be sovereign be giving you misinformation or not busting a gut to find out, if they're finding out they're saying things that are incorrect and it's been drawn to their attention, why aren't they looking into it? Very important question. Okay, let's hear it out of the horse's mouth. Here we go.
Now, in our constitution, which is a constitutional monarchy.
There you go. You said it, right? So he's acknowledged that we have a constitutional monarchy. So what does that mean? Where's the monarchy stem from? Only one source, right? It's not here in Australia. We don't have our own monarchy. So he's admitted it, but he's not teaching how that whole structure works. So here's how the structure works. You have, if you want to have a nation and you want to have a system of service that draws a boundary around, how that nation operates, there needs to be someone who holds the ultimate responsibility for making all that happen. No different to a tribal elder in, let's say, the jungles of Borneo, for example, if they even have one of those things, or in the jungles of South America. That same system. So someone is responsible for actually making sure that there's fairness and justice, right? That's all that a monarch is. They're not there to dictate to you. And so they obviously can't do all that by themselves. So what they need to do, because that's an office that's created, that people create what's called an office, and the true office that the monarch occupies is called the office of sovereign. So that means their job is to what? Preserve your sovereignty. That's why it's called the office of sovereign. They themselves are not sovereign. Their job is to preserve yours. So they need to create a whole bunch of offices. So that's why there's oaths of office, right? So politicians, which are not meant to be, they're just meant to be representatives of the people that reside in Parliament. They would take an oath to the same, most senior public servant, because they delegate roles out into little sub roles, I guess, public service roles. Police are another one. I showed you there's oaths. The military, the others, right? So they're charged with the defense of the nation. The police, or the constables is actually the correct term, they're charged with taking the responsibility of making sure that world government, for example, doesn't ever trounce on people's rights. That's a big one. That's what they don't do, but that's what they're actually swearing to. And that people amongst themselves, have a way to get help and assistance if they're ever being violated, until the people decide through trial by jury the guilt of, the accused. So it's always the people, because we're judging from conscience. Now, that's the system the monarch swears to uphold when they take the coronation oath. Now, if you choose to delegate responsibilities out to Parliament and create, like a decision-making body, if that Parliament does not uphold its moral responsibility to actually create what's called legislation. Now, the word legislation comes from the word legis, which is the Latin derivative, it's the English derivative of the Latin word legis. And legis is the plural term for the Latin word lex. Now, lex means law, and if legis is plural, legis is plural to law, that means it's like derivatives of law. So it needs to represent that which is actual law, not fake law, not man-made law, but the laws that exist in the universe. It needs to give expression to it. That's what it truly means, legislation. It cannot by any means have anything to do with dictating to you what to do with your life and how to run it, right? And the moral character of the society you live in. It's never been granted that, right? Why isn't he teaching these critical things? You talk about, people can't express it. How about the pot calling the kettle black here, right? This is how you express sovereignty, is with knowledge of your capacity to be self-governing and how the system was set up to reflect that, right? The correct system. And so that's the way it's designed. Now, if Parliament creates legislation that actually does start infringing on your rights, there must be a real time way to deal with that, not wait until things get to critical mass and you've got to wait for your public servant to go, you know what, maybe it's pushed it a bit far. That's not going to work out well for people, because there's going to be too much suffering before that happens. So there needs to be a real-time way of how that they can be regulated, and that is through the independence of the jury to judge on the justice of legislation. So the monarch has the first responsibility to actually grant assent to legislation if they can see that it's not going to be a source of harm to anyone. Now, they're not going to be able to foresee every single situation that's ever going to happen in people's lives. So then there has to be a way where that legislation can be scrutinized in any individual circumstance, right? Because sometimes it could be well-meaning legislation, but in a particular circumstance, it turns out that it was a source of suffering to an individual. That's what the independence of the jury is there to do. It's there to adjudicate whether the legislation in that specific instance was a source of harm for that individual in their private context of whatever happened in their lives, right? And if they deem it that it is unjust, and it just takes one jury member, doesn't have to be all of them in consensus, just one to say not guilty, then what that means is that legislation now is nullified in that specific instance, right? He's not explaining that. That's how we control our own destiny, right? And then when that's done, right, if there seems to be a pattern where that legislation is starting to bring more and more people into the courts because they're breaching it, then it starts to look like that it wasn't an accident, it wasn't unintended, right? That there might be a pattern of behavior in our legislators that is somewhat troublesome and like an alarm, but maybe they're not fit for purpose, these actual people. They might actually be a little bit bent. Do you know what I mean? And then we've got to start looking at the monarch as to why they're letting it through as well, if that keeps happening, right? So this is a way to keep a regular check on our system that's in real time. Now, why wouldn't he be giving you that information? Why would he be waiting until the sky is falling and you're down the well and you can't get out and then saying, well, if we just wait for the army to come get us, that'll be fine. That's our savior. Why would he be waiting for that? How's that you being sovereign, right? And then what I need to explain, the next part is what's called common law private prosecution. So if it's established that legislation now is a source of consistent pain and suffering for a lot of people, then the system is set up, the correct system, that any member of the public can bring any one of those legislators, so anyone whose name was on the bill that became that piece of legislation that consistently kept violating people's rights, they can bring them to court in front of the people who have suffered and have them privately prosecuted for breaches to peace, for breaches to your, any act of deception, also to any loss that it might have caused you, and also any harm that's come of it, right? So the 4 common law tenets: loss, breach of the peace, harm, and deception, which is fraud, right? So if it's done any of those things, they can be prosecuted in their private capacity. And why wouldn't he be telling you that information? Because that's real-time information that if we all understood it, we'd all be going forward and making sure it happened. We'd be confronting the police with this information. We'd be confronting the politicians. We wouldn't be marching the streets, just walking around banging stuff, right? We'd be going straight to the head of the snake, right? That's the police. That's the actual parliament. When they're sitting, right? Like thousands to millions of people, not sitting in Canberra on some open territory just with music blaring, etc., camping. No, we'd be going right to the source. Why didn't that ever happen? Got to ask yourself that, right? And people in thousands are unstoppable when they know the truth. And we'd be demanding that if they don't do their jobs, we are arresting them because they can't arrest all of us, right? There'd be all organized actions around that. Now people go, oh, how could that happen? When you know the truth, your capacity to create solutions just explodes. Now, so most people would be judging based on how they operate now, because they're not ascended into that higher order of consciousness because they're not attached to the actual truth. They don't have this knowledge embedded in their fibers. So your imagination can't trigger the actual solution right now. So if you're judging it from where you are right now, it's not going to help. And so these are the critical bits of information of how we are sovereign and how we are constantly able to control our destiny through the independence of the jury. And the jury is operating out of their conscience. That's neutral ground. It doesn't favor anybody, right? So these are you can set up anywhere, this system. So it's not complicated. You cannot write this stuff down. All the Constitution is an agreement, right? That anyone who chooses to be a public servant is bound to uphold, not the people. It can't limit the people. It can only limit those who get a grant of power, right? Because power corrupts absolutely, does it not? So if there isn't some form of accountability, we get what we've got today. And so this is the way it's always in check. They've always got that over their heads. They know what's coming for them. So you're not going to attract psychopaths, right? It's just not going to happen, right? So why are you not getting this information from people who profess to be there to protect your rights? Really, really important questions, guys. So that's what I wanted to give you for today. I can give you extra stuff. Actually, before I go, there's a couple other things I want to show you. So just bear with me before I finish. Now, if you remember, he did mention Magna Carta at the beginning of this video, right? And he looked up to the ceiling at the same time, right? So funny how he gave that a different sort of expression to all the other things he said. So that might be telling you something, a bit of a signal. Now, look at this. They minted a coin, 1215 to 2015. That's a 800-year anniversary. That takes a lot of trouble to go to that, right? So why would they do that if it had no power or value, right? So there's your first clue, right? Never got shown that by His Excellency, the one who's there telling you who's there for your sovereignty. And he's got all the solutions. Never got shown that. Let's see what else there is. Just quickly, I'm just going to show you this. You might be thinking, why are you showing me this? Here we go, the Daily Telegraph. I can't show you the date, it doesn't blow up well enough, but the next thing I'm going to show you came from this edition of the Daily Telegraph, right? Which talks about something very significant about that system of governments that I explained, about how a monarch gets to keep their job and what they need to do if they, what needs to happen for them to lose it, right? So I'm about to show you that bit. Okay, so inside that newspaper I just showed you, this is what appeared. I think it was probably the third page or something, really tiny. Britain continues to remain under Article 61 to this day. Parliament cannot reverse it. At the bottom it says, the Queen failed to respond correctly according to her constitutional and contractual duty, the coronation oath. British are sovereign beings and you are compelled to rebel, right? So that's what this article is about, is that there's a right of recourse if the monarch, the office holder of sovereign, does not fulfill their commitment to protect the rights of the people and their inalienable capacity to be sovereign. If they actually flout that and allow Parliament, which is just people that are under their protection, I guess, not so much protection, but under their authority, because the ultimate authority rests with the monarch, and then they delegate that. So anyone who represents them, if they actually step outside the law, the monarch is liable. That's the way it's run, right? And so in 2001, this was invoked because in 1999, funnily enough, the same year that all Australian government departments all corporatised. Funny about that. So 1999 was the beginning of the Blair government starting to work ways to sell the British people to the EU to sign over their sovereignty. Now that's a war crime, because the only way you can lose your sovereignty is in open battle. No other way. You can't have your public servants signing it off. That's like the biggest war crime out. And that's what they did. They started cooking all that up in 1999. And finally over here, what happened? Well, if you have a look, when you go onto ABN Lookup, that's when a lot of conversions happened. And then everything started going to GST after that. That's not an accident, guys, right? That's when I had that whole corporate planned across the Commonwealth, not just here in England, but across the Commonwealth. So it was all planned, guys. It's not an accident. So in 2001, the British Parliament, led by Blair, they actually signed this Treaty of Nice that actually sent the British whole justice system, everything, to the European Union and put it under their jurisdiction without the people having any say in it, right? So that just outright massively biggest crime you can commit, because all crimes come from violation of sovereignty, right? So this article, you can find it. It's in a lot of groups. Practical Law for Dissent is a good one to find it in. That's a Facebook group. There's a Telegram group. I haven't got it in the Facebook page. I'm about to show you soon. So that's probably something I could upload. So I might do that as well. And so it shows you what actually happened, the system that is in place, the correct system, and it's all under the 1215 Magna Carta, right? Which is Article 61. And that is, if they are in breach, anyone who acts for government is in breach of their moral responsibility to protect the people's sovereignty, then there's a way that the monarch can be petitioned. And if they don't do their job and correct it, they lose their job. And as soon as they lose their job, they're dethroned. And because they are the one who's the most responsible for the entire running of the system, right? If they lose their job, every other public servant cannot have any validity, because who do they swear to? They swear to them. So then they've lost their job, right? So everyone who professes to act, for the Crown or a Crown officer is not. They're a criminal imposter. That's police, army, MPs, bureaucrats, the entire show. That's what he would be telling you if you were to really be sovereign and he was serious about your sovereign. We've been running since 2001. We've been run by all these criminal imposters. And that's just because people don't know it. And it's going to sound really far-fetched to a lot of people because they're so indoctrinated that the Australian Constitution is valid. Right? But if you're serious about it, look, the oaths of those politicians and all other public servants, they all lead to one place. So that's got to mean something, guys. So start thinking about it. You'd know about this, right? And you know that you can do something about it now, right? You don't wait for anyone else. You can start informing them of the truth, every single one, whether it's a judicial officer, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a military personnel, whether it's a parliamentarian of any description, a minister, a bureaucrat, a government department employee, all of them, other corporations that use legislation, like, the ones that told you had to mask up and get jabbed. You can use this because they have no validity if there's no lawful system in place, right? So if we're all doing it, that's when it changes. And if he's got reach, right, and people believe him, why wouldn't he use this knowledge to actually get people to start actioning now or yesterday or last year or the year before, instead of we're all sucking eggs for as long as we possibly can? You know, why would you be deprived of that if that was someone who was really serious about your sovereignty? And now I'm going to show you some more stuff that shows how it's really legit. So this is a piece written by David Robinson. He was the founder of Practical Lawful Dissent in England. He was pretty much like the, what would you call, the pioneer in a lot of ways of this entire knowledge that I'm giving you. Not all of it, a lot was handed to him, but he also did a lot of work and started refining a process of how we could actually challenge the system in a lawful way, not using their system to beat the system, but using the Constitution to actually show them where they're criminal, right? So he did a lot of work. It took him over 20 years. He died a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. I can't remember exactly. Yet this knowledge is there for everyone to discover. So look up Practical Lawful Dissent on Facebook. That's a really good place to find them. I think they still got a website called practicallawfuldissent.com, I'm pretty sure. So have a look here. When addressing the Australian people by letter on Magna Carta's 800th anniversary in 2015, she, that's Queen Elizabeth, stated, "The story of the British monarchy is intertwined with that of Runnymede." So that's where the whole sealing of Magna Carta happened. And Magna Carta. The values of Magna Carta are not just important to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, and what's Australia part of? Commonwealth, but across the world. Its principles are significant and enduring. Now, just to show you that that's not something that's made up, it actually appears in the, what would you call it? In the mass media rags, all right? So now I'm going to show you that. All right, here we go in The Guardian. Just going to go down here. I'll just get rid of this stuff about Snowden. There we go, then we can see better. So this is obviously Magna Carta leaders celebrate 800th anniversary of the Great Charter. Now let me move down. Where is it? Here we go. The story of the British monarchy is intertwined with that of Runnymede and Magna Carta. The values of Magna Carta are not just important to the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, but across the world. Its principles are significant and enduring. So you can look at that anytime you like. There you can see the URL up there. So just showing you it's not made up, guys, that it actually has foundation. It has been reported elsewhere. So I'm going to be back in a sec. So just bear with me one moment. I just want to go back to this article because it's by Caroline Davies, by the way. And I think her name appeared in that Guardian article, if I'm not mistaken, the one I just showed you a moment ago. So it talks about what happened and how they invoked it. So that's a Barons Committee. That's the way it was set up, because they're the Barons are the ones who actually negotiated the entire Magna Carta, because it was just a written expression of what they already had going anyway. They just had, just like before, people just passed down the law through word of mouth, just like they do in tribes. So now they wanted an actual, something they could prove, because the atrocities were so great of what King John had done. So what I wanted to explain is, a lot of people don't know this, is that Brexit was a result of Article 61 being invoked. So very few people know that. That's a trap to get people to actually vote themselves, use the parliamentary system where it's not even legitimate to be in effect, because it should have been dissolved. Like all the parliaments across the Commonwealth should have been dissolved as soon as the monarch lost their job. That was what was meant to happen. So one of the psyops they ran is to run this Brexit thing, right? Where they got people to vote to see if they wanted to stay in England or stay in Europe. Because they signed them over to it. Think about that. They signed them over in 2001, and then they got them to vote. So using the parliamentary system as opposed to getting rid of all the criminals, right? And cleaning out the swamp, so to speak, right? So that made the people believe that this parliamentary system is the way they get their sovereignty back. And so because if they vote to go back in England, then it bypasses Article 61 and no one's looking over here. So the way the Satanists work is they always dissuade you. They don't stop you from seeing it, but they'll find ways to dissuade you from looking at it as legitimate. That's the Satanic creed. That's how they do it. Now, is this guy doing something similar? Looks highly likely. All right. So why wouldn't you be giving this to you as critical information that you need right now, that you can change your life with, if we all get behind it and rally around it? So why is that missing? So now I'm going to show you what's been put together, right, for you to actually stand on your sovereignty, stand for truth, and start informing these criminals that are masquerading as public servants, all the critical ones, right, Just going to show you one excerpt of the letters that have been created and where you can find them, right? So you can actually action your sovereignty, right? Because to me, if someone's going to help you with your sovereignty, they're going to give you the tools of how you can do it. They're going to help you with the knowledge, show you, how it can be done, give you that kind of guidance. So this is what I'm going to show you now. Okay, so this is from an excerpt. I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs because this video is pretty long as it is. This is from a letter called Dear Judicial Officer. So anyone can send it to, whether it's a magistrate, a judge, doesn't matter what jurisdiction, federal, state, local, doesn't matter. It's all the same because it's the same system. So I'm just going to read this one or two paragraphs here. Furthermore, when a monarch swears to uphold the laws of God, they are pledging to adhere to the injunctions outlined in the foundational books in the Bible. These injunctions encompass the prohibition, it's very important info here, guys, of man-made legislation to trespass on individual rights. So pay close attention to that. Also, the sole judgment of one individual over another. Now, what are magistrates' courts? What do? It's one man judging over another. And the practice of usury, right? So this is the three fundamental pillars of everything is not allowed. That's what a constitution is what is not allowed. That these public servants cannot do this. If they do, they become criminal. That's what this is saying here. Therefore, if a monarch allows the continuation of legislation that enforces immoral mandates on the people, permits one person to pass judgment on another, or tolerates usury within their realms, they are in fact violating their oath. In such instances, the people have the right to assert that the monarch has breached their sworn commitment unless the monarch takes decisive action to correct the aforementioned violations. So Article 61, the whole system was set up that once the monarch is informed of the violations of anyone that acts in their name, that they have 40 days to rectify it. And they failed, and that's why they lost their job, right? That was the system they set up. If they don't do what they're supposed to, out you go. And no one knows about it, right? So then I'm going to go down to this one here, to claim that you are fulfilling your obligations. So this is to the judiciary, if you want to send it to the judiciary. Under Australian law, you must prove the source of authority from which it is derived. However, no judicial officer, whether that title judge, magistrate, registrar, or court clerk, has ever established this with any substantial evidence. The fact that public property is referred to as Crown land and all public servants are required to take an oath of allegiance to the most senior public servant who is bound by the constraints of English common law, which is called legum terrae, which explicitly excludes statutes, laws, regulations made by government and judges' precedents, which is called case law in Latin, stare decisis, serves as verifiable evidence that Australian law is at best a counterfeit of Commonwealth law. Okay, so I'm just showing you those things. There's a lot of other stuff in this, right? You've got the 5 pillars here. This is from Ken O'Downey. A lot of this work has come from him. He's got a website called Democracy Defined. It really explains it this guy is a scholar on this in very clear terms that you cannot be confused ever again once you read this. So there's 5 points there that he explains. This comes from his, I think he put something out called the Constitution Treatise, critical info there. So just showing some more stuff. Now I'm going to go to the police constable letter, guy. Okay, so this is an excerpt of the Dear Constable letter that anyone can send to any police officer you like. It can be the head of the station you're at. It can be the commissioner. It can be just a lowly constable. Doesn't matter. As many as you like, right? The more the better. You can organise a campaign in your community and you can all target somebody. Like, it's all up to you how you do it. It is every member of society's collective responsibility to ensure that the justice system operates with integrity and impartiality. This means that anyone cooperating with courts, absent of trial by jury, is party to the premeditated participation in and promotion of a pretense instead of real trial by jury, which is high treason, and is for each participating individual the personal commission of a premeditated criminal act. Now let's see if they can actually deny that's a statement of fact. Now this is something most people don't know. Your sworn duty as constable is to ensure that justice is upheld. That grants you higher standing than politicians, judges, magistrates, barristers, and solicitors, because constables have the grant of authority to enter any court to ensure everyone within that court is acting within the law of the land, and arrest any magistrate, judge, barrister, etc., acting beyond what law of the land, what the law of the land allows, should I say. Failure to do so is a criminal offence of the highest order. So you're telling them about their day-to-day criminality by allowing these magistrates' courts and all the other versions they have of going and not arresting these criminals, right? So you're showing that. There's a bunch of other stuff in there, but basically this talks about the oath that they swear, and if they don't stand under that oath, they're actually domestic terrorists, right? That's what it pretty much boils down to. So that's a very powerful letter, guys. If the more of you get behind it, that's when they start panicking. All right, so that's available. I'm going to show you where when I finish in a moment. I've just got one more to show you. Okay, so this one is for any public servant. Could be an MP, could be a member of, when I'm saying MP, member of Parliament, same thing. Minister, could be a bureaucrat. It doesn't really matter. Could be even a government employee, right? So I'm just going to show you some excerpts here again. So it says, the political party system, along with the accompanying voting process known as adult suffrage, was deliberately created to deceive and dilute the more direct rule of law. These rules, or this rule, preserves the inherent ability of the people to shape the character of society directly through the jury. In our proper system, there is no requirement for politics or the imposition of policies to dictate moral behaviour to the people. It is not the role of an administrative system of service to involve itself in the minutiae of our daily lives. That's a critical bit of knowledge there, right? So what that's saying is that if you're a public servant, how do you get to dictate to people, right? As soon as you cross that line, you become criminal. That's basically what that's saying, because that's no longer a service, right? Voting is not democracy. That's like tyranny by majority. That's all that is. So it's explaining all that there. We've been conned big time, guys. And all the letters, they all finish, I'll just show you, with a final thing. And at the bottom, you see they're actually got references to where the knowledge has come from. So it says, as I have supplied you with an articulated and referenced explanation, it is incumbent on you to provide the lawful source of authority authority that you claim to act on or act on behalf of, and refute each false statement point for point in substance in a dated written reply by post within no more than 10 days of receipt of the letter, accompanied by your legibly written full name and wedding signature on your full commercial liability under penalty of perjury. If you fail to refute any of the points above in substance without establishing the source of lawful authority upon which you rely to make demands on we the people, the law requires you to articulate the specific action you have committed to taking in order to restore the rule of law you are bound to uphold and preserve in your reply. Failure to do so will be taken as an admission of the facts and assertions contained herein, bearing your culpability in betraying the sanctity of trust vested in you as an honourable office holder of a legitimate system of governance. Sincerely, your name. So basically, what that means is that there is no, that term government, that's a fallacy. It's really a system, an administrative system that is there to assist the people in living free. That's really what it's supposed to be. We are the government, because government means control. So the real government is the people. We're the ones who have the levers of power over our administrative system. That's essentially what that's saying. And now they need to refute it's not true, because how else would you define a public servant if they're not in service, as opposed to in power, which this man that I've been showing you videos of keeps saying he's gunning for. Okay, so now I'm going to show you where you can find all this, where it all stems from, and you just need to click on it and download it and then send it will. So I'm going to write back and I'll show you in a second. Okay, so this is the Facebook group that's been set up. It's called the MC 1215 Knowledge Centre. Obviously MC is Magna Carta. So Knowledge Centre AU, you just need to look for it. Just join. It's an immediate membership. As long as you join, there's no questions, nothing like that. And then you can go to the file section, or you can just start scrolling down. You've got videos there that show you the true nature of how to deal with police and what happens when you deal with them correctly. So there's even videos of like people talking about Article 61 and watching the police just walk off. So you've got all that evidence that if it's all, you know, pie in the sky stuff, why is it having power today, right? So that's all there for you, plus those letters and plus a whole bunch of other information if you want to take it further. So you've got different levels of activation. So if you just want to do something initiating once, you've got those letters to start with, right? But at least you have power to action your sovereignty, not what he says, which I'm going to finish by playing how he shows you what you're left with, right? Yeah. So I'll be right back so you can see what sovereignty looks like as he describes it. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with the final word from the man who makes a point of telling you that you don't know how to express your sovereignty. All law derives from you, that you are ultimately in charge of your own life. This is the remedy, is what he's left for you, right? As to what's left for you to do as someone who's sovereign, has power. This is what he's telling you you're left with.
What remedy do the Estonian people have? And the answer is nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because prior to that, the government would have appealed to the Privy Council. We're no longer part of that, and it doesn't matter anymore. And so we're stuck with Masonic filth. Here's the practicality. Here's the fact of life in Australia. We're stuck with the Masonic filth that have penetrated every aspect of law, and we have no comeback. And so for those serious students...
There you go. You're stuck with Masonic filth, and you have no comeback. That's what sovereignty looks like as he's describing it. So you've got no power right now. Now, tell me if that's a man who's serious about you being sovereign. I've just laid out the facts, guys. I've shown you the evidence. Whether you want to stay in cognitive dissonance, like all those people that you accuse of, being like sheeple that just walk into the jabs and just, lay down and take one. If you want to have go at them and expose their cognitive dissonance while you ignore yours, that's on you, right? Because that's how karma works. You're just going to have to keep learning the same lesson over and over, and things are going to have to get more and more painful until you actually see the truth as it is. But that's a choice you get to make. But guess what? While you're doing that, the rest of us suffer as well. And you're going to take responsibility for that. Okay, this has gone a lot longer than I wanted to, so I'm just going to leave it there now.